A democracy in the making or one-party politics? Rwanda is holding parliamentary elections, but as opposition groups struggle to gain a political foothold, the ruling party is credited with creating an African success story. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Stephen Cole. It's known as the land of 1,000 hills, but it's also notorious for a genocide that saw hundreds of thousands killed. Dark days. But Rwanda has earned international praise since then for reinventing itself both economically and democratically. Voters are casting their ballots in parliamentary elections. 11 parties are running for 80 seats. 24 seats are reserved for women. Critics, though, say it's a one-horse race that will see the ruling party of President Paul Kagame romp to victory. But Rwanda is hailed as a development and economic success story. The World Bank ranks Rwanda 52nd out of 185 countries on its Ease of Doing Business Index. And it's among the top 3 in sub-Saharan Africa, along with South Africa and Mauritius. The International Monetary Fund puts Rwanda's 2012 growth at 7.7%. And on Friday, President Kagame launched an economic development plan aimed at pushing economic growth to 11.5% for each of the next 5 years. It's a strong platform for the president, who's been running a comparatively low-profile election campaign. To our discussion in a moment, but first, Peter Grester has sent us this report for Inside Story from the capital, Kigali.
To its critics, Rwanda looks decidedly undemocratic. The ruling Rwandan Patriotic Front has dominated politics here since the genocide of 1994, and it won the last elections back in 2008 with 78% of the vote. A lot of the opposition parties often complain that they are intimidated. They say that there are countless bureaucratic obstacles that stop them from functioning effectively as opposition parties, and they say that occasionally their activists are beaten up or sometimes imprisoned. The government insists that's to misunderstand the situation here. They say that to try and see Rwanda through the confrontational style of politics that is so typical in the West and other parts of Africa is to misunderstand the way that this country has tried to re-engineer its political systems. It designed its constitution in the wake of the genocide to avoid that kind of confrontation and create what they call the politics of consensus. That means that there are all sorts of features of the political system that avoid the big confrontational elections that we've seen in the past. For example, there are no constituencies. Individual candidates don't compete with one another for particular seats. Instead, voters are faced with a choice simply of supporting a particular party, and that party then nominates the candidates that it wants to take the seats in Parliament. And the electoral cycle is also out of sync. The President faces election once every 7 years. The Chamber of Deputies, what we're seeing tomorrow, comes around for election once every 5 years, and the Senate is once every 8 years. And that means, again, that we don't see any kind of make or break political elections, a kind of thing where everything is up for grabs. Still, there is no doubt about the outcome of tomorrow's election. The Rwandan Patriotic Front will win it, and probably with the kind of result that it already holds, around 70, maybe even 80%. This is Peter Grester in Kigali for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Kigali is Shayka Anastase, Chief Executive Officer of the Rwanda Governance Board. In Brussels, Kris Berwouts, an independent consultant on conflict, security and democracy in Central Africa. And on Skype from Antwerp is Filip Reyntjens, a professor of African law and politics at the University of Antwerp and author of a book, Political Governance in Post-Genocide Rwanda. Let's go first to Shayka Anastase. So, Shayka, Rwandans are going to the polls, but the vote has its critics. Do you think these elections will be fully transparent, free and fair?
Fairness and transparency of elections is a guarantee by the Constitution, and past processes have shown that Rwanda obeyed to that. Elections will be free and fair. Rwandese will express themselves, and they will base their choices on the results they are seeing and on the programs that were presented to them by different political parties and independent candidates.
Professor Reyntjens, in Brussels, you have written a book on governance in Rwanda, so you will have done your research. Will these elections, in your view, be fair, or have some parties been excluded from the process?
Well, I think the elections will be quite irrelevant, and of course I disagree with what Mr. Shayka has just said from Kigali, but he can't say otherwise because he heads the Rwanda Governance Board, which is a government institution. Past processes actually in parliamentary elections 2003, 2008 show otherwise. The record shows otherwise. Elections have been flawed consistently for several reasons. Opposition parties have not been registered. Their leaders have been harassed and even jailed. I mean, 2 leaders of opposition parties are serving long prison sentences as we speak. Actually, 3 of them are serving long prison sentences. And the electoral process itself is fundamentally flawed. There's been a lot of ballot box stuffing. The counting procedures have been extremely opaque. And it's quite interesting to see that the result of the 2008, I should say, parliamentary elections, the last ones, actually the RPF, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, after the rigging I refer to, actually got 98% of the vote. They thought it was so Stalinist that they reduced it to 78% and gave some seats to other parties that were no opposition parties anyway. So it's a fake process.
Kris Berwouts, a former Prime Minister, has predicted that the ruling FPR, Rwandan Popular Front, will keep its majority it has in Parliament, and the smaller parties will get the rest because they're offshoots, effectively, of the FPR. That's effectively a political monopoly, isn't it?
Well, it is. Throughout the years since '94, you have seen how Rwanda developed into nearly a one-party state, and then, of course, from the beginning, a limited number of small parties were tolerated to create the impression of multipartism, but without really having an ambition to put question marks to the policy of the Rwandan government. So, of course, this election will have as the only result the confirmation of the existing power balance. That is absolutely clear.
Can I go back to Professor Reyntjens? Professor, the political system in Rwanda is based largely on consensus, not adversarial politics as it is in the West. Can you explain a little more about the political process in Rwanda?
Well, I don't think it is based on consensus. It is based on what the RPF defines as what is politically admissible or not. And they then call that consensus. It is impossible in Rwanda to even determine whether there is some consensus, because it is simply impossible and extremely dangerous to express dissident views. There's, apart from physical ways of avoiding that by arresting and harassing and even killing people, including abroad, I should add, there's a whole panoply of legislation that allows the RPF to decide what is politically admissible. There is legislation on so-called divisionism or sectarianism. There's legislation on genocide ideology. And the interpretation given to that sort of legislation is that even moderately phrased criticism of government policies and of the RPF amounts to criminal offenses. So in other words, there is no consensus. It is the RPF that determines what the so-called consensus is all about.
Kris Berwouts, do you see the opposition as a chosen opposition? Therefore, there's not going to be a political opposition in reality?
The electoral processes in the past and also today have been without really political debate. So you have to distinguish between a genuine opposition, which at this moment consists of 3-4 well-organized parties, but they are not allowed into the process. They have been slowed down by all means, including putting some of their leaders in prison, including keeping them from being registered, and then the other parties who do participate, you cannot consider them as real opposition parties. They're basically part of the constellation, the political configuration around the FPR, RPF.
Well, you're basically saying that the opposition and indeed some of the MPs are, if you like, just separate, because the man who runs the country, Paul Kagame, is in fact the de facto leader and has been a central figure in Rwanda ever since the 1994 genocide. He was born to Tutsi parents. His family escaped a Hutu-led revolution when he was a child, settling in Uganda. Kagame was later involved in the war that deposed Ugandan President Idi Amin and helped current President Yoweri Museveni come to power. He went on to lead a rebellion against Rwanda's Hutu-controlled government, and his Rwandan Patriotic Army drove out the Hutu army to end the 1994 genocide. Let's go back to Brussels and Filip Reyntjens. President Kagame, he's the darling of the West, isn't he?
Yes, he is, and understandably so. I mean, and I think it's important to understand that while on the one hand, Rwanda has been successful in developing a technocratic or bureaucratic governance with the growth rates and economic achievements that were already highlighted earlier in this show, donors like that. I mean, they feel their money is well spent on health, education, and things like that. The problem is that Rwanda's political governance is fundamentally flawed, and that the very poor performance in terms of political governance will unfortunately probably undo the achievements of decent bureaucratic, technocratic governance. And that's the whole dilemma donors are faced with. So yes, Rwanda is a donor darling. And also because, you know, after the genocide, people very much thought in terms of good guys and bad guys. Here was the good guy. Although the story is not a story of good guys and bad guys, it's a story of bad guys, previous regime and this regime. And this regime, there's a great deal of continuity between the former regime and the current one. And unfortunately, the outlook in political terms, as far as I can see, is pretty grim. The country may again descend into violent chaos and bloodshed, which might affect the whole region.
Shayka, I want to go to Shayka because Shayka Anastase, we're hearing that Rwanda is in effect, and I hope you can hear me, is in effect a political monopoly, and the election is a sham. How do you react to accusations like that?
So, come again.
What we're hearing is that Rwanda's election system is a sham, it's a fraud, and that all the seats are in the president's pocket. What do you say to them? What do you say to your critics?
No, of course that is false, and I understand the critics, and I understand where they are coming from, especially when it comes to Filip Reyntjens. And two things very shortly. Number one is that they need to understand the grounds of this political system we are evolving in. Rwanda has chosen, after the 1994 genocide, to go away from the adversarial politics and confrontational democracy. We have opted for a consensual model of democracy. We are evolving, we are having results on the ground, we are growing our political system, and our political parties are building their capacities to deliver more results. That's what interests Rwandese, that's what we are evolving in. We are looking forward to consolidate our peace, to build our social cohesion, to go for our unity, to expand and deepen our socio-economic transformation and development. That's what we are heading to. That's what our political system is all about. There is no dictatorship here around. Participation is greater and is growing and growing more every day. But what is surprising is to see the more we develop, we improve our own system, our own political governance, the more the critiques, especially from the side of Filip Reyntjens in the core, is becoming much more aggressive. That is also impressive, but that is Rwanda, that's how it is. but we are ready to move on and continue to build our system.
I want a second question to Shayka, because, again, I want to stick with this accusation of political intolerance. It's said that the president's serious opponents are barred from standing, leaving only really, I suppose, puppet parties to oppose the president. How do you react to that?
I think the political party system in Rwanda counts now 11 political parties. All of them are free to choose their own programs and to compete on programmatic grounds. What is confusing some of the critique is that not only Rwanda, but in Africa in general, one of the colonial legacies we have had is that the divide and rule, colonial divide and rule, has left out the democracy being confused by divisive politics. After the 1994, we embraced that consensus is going to guide our political systems. And the confusing element that is coming from the critique is that they are not seeing any more adversarial politics in Rwanda. And that is like they are not used to such kind of political system, which may have its own challenges and its own weaknesses, but which has that quality of moving forward the society.
Okay, so you say society is moving forward. Let's stick with that theme and move on to Kris Berwouts, because what Shayka's basically saying is that Kagame's achievements perhaps are blinding the West to its shortcomings.
I would like to add something to the discussion about Rwanda's status as a donor darling. I think it's very important to be aware of the fact that probably the good days are over. We have seen how Rwanda's involvement in the Congolese war by supporting M23 has caused strong statements and measures from most of its loyal partners, let's say the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Sweden, Holland. So that's something very important for the near future. The question about the achievements, well, maybe there are two things you have to consider also. Probably it's important to be aware of the fact that Rwanda's success story is partly due to the surplus which it has extracted from Congo's mineral resources, and that's something important we have to be aware of.
All right.
And then the second thing is and the second point is Rwanda's achievements is maybe based on an economic model which has not the poor parts of the population on board, which privileges the rich people. And then the question is, what will be the impact on the potential of conflict in the country, and how sustainable will that be? Okay. These are questions which today are not yet answered.
Okay, well, we'll see. But Rwanda has most certainly been striving to emerge as a country from the shadow of what the world knows as its darkest chapter in its history. That was the systematic massacre of hundreds of thousands of Tutsis in 1994 by Hutu militias and some elements of the Rwandan military. Voters backed a draft constitution in 2003 banning the incitement of ethnic hatred. Paul Kagame won the first presidential election since the genocide that year, and his Rwandan Patriotic Front party won the first multi-party elections. 2005 saw the mass release of prisoners detained over the 1994 massacre, with more to follow. And 2007 marked a peace deal with the Democratic Republic of Congo, an agreement to hand over those suspected of involvement in the genocide. Kagame's ruling party won another large majority in the 2008 parliamentary elections, and Kagame was re-elected president in 2010. But last year, the UN accused Rwanda of fueling revolt in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The US and the UK were among countries that suspended aid to Rwanda as a result, and those tensions with DRC still exist. Filip Reyntjens, how would you describe the tensions with the Democratic Republic of Congo?
Well, they've been ongoing for quite some time. Rwanda has intervened in the Congo a first time in 1996 already, launched a second war in 1998, and has remained present on Congolese territory ever since, supporting proxy rebel groups there and also engaging in the exploitation of natural resources of the DRC, which, as the previous speaker has said, has contributed to some extent to Rwandan's economic growth. There's no doubt about that. But aid, too, has been a very important instrument. Over 20% of Rwanda's GDP and about 50% of its government budget is aid. So that's another instrument that has helped to fuel that economic growth. The interference in the DRC has cost Rwanda, particularly since about 1.5 years ago, good year ago, has cost Rwanda a great deal of political goodwill. I mean, its main sponsors like the United States and the UK have been increasingly worried about the regional destabilization that is the consequence of that. And it also worries a number of neighboring countries or other African countries. It's very clear, for instance, that the countries of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, are extremely concerned about this because it might spread towards Southern Africa. As we speak, an African peacekeeping and additional intervention brigade has been deployed by countries including one neighbor of Rwanda, actually Tanzania, but also Malawi and South Africa. And this is a very clear expression of concern about Rwanda's support for the most recent rebel movement, M23. And Rwanda actually is the only party in the whole game actually denying that. Everyone knows that Rwanda has been supporting and is supporting M23, and Rwanda is denying it while everyone knows it is the case.
All right, Filip, leave it there. You're saying, because I want to put that point, Shayka must answer that. Shayka Anastase, is Rwanda supporting the M23?
Thank you very much. If I understood Reyntjens and the President speaker well, it's like there are two issues that we need to be fixed on. Number one, the problem of the Congo have started even before the President Kagame became president, and I think even before he was born. And let us not find in Rwanda a scapegoat of Congolese problem. It would be very unfair, and it's even very dangerous that those actors who have been, and I think Reyntjens knows this very well, who have been in the problem of the DRC since 100 years are now turning around and trying to make Rwanda the victim of their total action, their bad actions in that republic. And number two is that it will be a total mess if the international community is misled in the understanding of the real problems on the DRC, and all the problem is going to be turned to Rwanda as if the Rwanda was the problem of the DRC. There are problems of the governance on the ground. There are problems of this militia in the DRC, and there are problems of the FDLR. Those ones we don't have to forget about this. And I'm impressed to see how the international community is being vibrant and is being aggressive vis-a-vis the M23, but they have a blind eye when it comes to the FDLR. They are there for the last almost 20 years. They are a genocidal force. They know what they have committed here. They know what they have been doing in all those years in the DRC, but I haven't seen.
All right.
I'm asking myself why this international community hasn't shown any mobilization.
Okay, you've explained it. You've explained it very well
against those forces. As
I just want, because our time is running out, in 20 seconds, Filip, is this a country with a democracy in the making, and will this election take Rwanda towards greater democracy?
Let me first say, if I may, just a few seconds.
We're very short of time, by the way.
Shayka hasn't answered your question. What he says about the Congo, I agree with most of what he said, by the way. There are big problems in the Congo, and it's not all Rwanda's fault. As far as Rwanda is concerned, I don't see a meaningful move towards democracy. I see a great deal of structural violence, and I simply don't think the RPF can afford a level playing field.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your brevity there. And thanks to Shayka Anastase, Kris Berwouts and Filip Reyntjens. Don't forget, You can find this programme and much more at aljazeera.com. Just follow the links for shows and Inside Story. Thanks for watching from me, Stephen Cole. Goodbye for now.